The stars looked different from this side of the galaxy. Daniel Carter had learned that during his first year in space. Back on Earth, he used to watch the night sky from his small apartment in Ohio. Now he watched alien suns from the window of a royal starship, and sometimes he wondered how his life had changed so much. 5 cycles ago, Daniel had been a soldier. He served on the diplomatic ship called the Hope of Terra. It was supposed to be a simple mission. Humanity had just made contact with the Empire, and they wanted to establish trade routes. Daniel was part of the security team. He never expected to become anything more than a guard standing in the corner during boring meetings. Then everything went wrong. The ship came under attack near the outer rim. A group of slavers from a species called the had been watching the diplomatic vessel for days. They knew it carried important people. They knew it would bring a good price on the black market. Daniel remembered the explosion that ripped through the hull. He remembered the screams and the smoke. He remembered fighting through corridors filled with dead friends and broken dreams. Most of all, he remembered finding the princess. She was hiding in a storage room, pressed against the wall, her silver eyes wide with terror. Was young then, barely the equivalent of 16 in human years. She had been traveling with the ambassador to observe the human negotiations. It was supposed to be a learning experience for her. Instead, it became a nightmare. 12 warriors had boarded the ship. They were tall creatures with hard shells covering their bodies and 4 arms each. They carried plasma rifles that could burn through metal, and they were looking for valuable hostages. Daniel had nothing but a broken blade he had pulled from a fallen comrade. His rifle was empty. His armor was cracked. Blood ran down his face from a wound on his forehead. Any smart person would have hidden and waited for rescue. But Daniel saw the fear in the young princess's eyes, and something inside him refused to let her be taken. He fought all 12 of them. The battle was brutal and ugly. Daniel took 3 plasma burns during the fight. One hit his shoulder. Another burned through his side. The third caught his leg and nearly dropped him to the ground. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Every time a warrior got close to the princess, Daniel threw himself between them. When it was over, 12 bodies lay on the floor and Daniel collapsed at the princess's feet, barely alive. The rescue team found them 2 hours later. They found the princess unharmed, sitting beside the unconscious human, holding his hand and crying. She had never seen anyone fight like that. She had never seen anyone willing to die for a stranger. The doctors said Daniel should have died. The wounds were too severe. His body had lost too much blood. But humans, they learned, were stubborn creatures. Daniel refused to die. He spent 3 weeks in a medical pod, and when he finally woke up, the first thing he saw was the princess sitting beside him. She had visited every day while he was unconscious. The emperor came to see him after he recovered. He was a tall being with silver skin and ancient eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of 1,000 years. He looked at Daniel for a long time without speaking. Then he offered Daniel a choice. He could return to Earth with full honors and enough credits to live comfortably for the rest of his short human life. They would remember him as a hero. Or he could stay. The princess needed a guardian. The emperor had watched the recordings from the ship. He had seen how Daniel fought, how he refused to give up, how he protected with every breath in his body. They had many skilled warriors, but none of them had shown the kind of dedication this human had displayed. Daniel looked at. She was standing behind her father, trying to appear composed, but he could see the hope in her silver eyes. She was scared and alone, and she had nearly been taken by slavers. She needed someone who would never let that happen again. Daniel made his decision without hesitation. He stayed. The years that followed were not easy. Many did not trust humans. They saw them as primitive creatures with short and limited intelligence. They whispered that the emperor had made a mistake. They said a human could never truly protect a princess. Daniel ignored them all. He trained harder than any of the guards. He learned their language perfectly. He studied their customs and their politics. He learned how to spot assassins in a crowd and how to detect poison in food. He became a shadow, always 3 steps behind the princess, always watching, always ready. Grew up during those 5 cycles. She transformed from a frightened young girl into a confident diplomat. She learned how to speak to kings and queens, how to negotiate treaties, how to command respect from beings much older than herself. And through it all, Daniel was there. Other species began to notice the human who guarded the princess. They called him the Shadow because he seemed to appear from nowhere whenever danger approached. They called him the Watchman because his eyes never stopped moving, never stopped searching for threats. They called him many things, but none of those names mattered to Daniel. He was simply her guardian. Called him Danny when they were alone. She told him about her fears and her dreams. She asked him questions about Earth, about humans, about what it felt like to see the universe from such a short-lived perspective. Daniel answered honestly. He told her about Ohio and about his family back home. He told her about baseball and hamburgers and the way rain smelled on summer afternoons. In return, she taught him about poetry and music. She showed him how to read the stars the way her people did. She introduced him to foods he could not pronounce and traditions he did not understand but came to respect. They were an unlikely pair, an ancient alien princess and a simple human soldier, but somewhere along the way they had become family. Now they were traveling to Nexus Prime for the Galactic Concord Summit, was going to speak about peace and cooperation between species. Daniel was going to make sure she stayed alive long enough to deliver her speech. He had no idea what was coming. But whatever it was, he would be ready. Because that was what Guardians did. The Dominion of had ruled 47 worlds through fear and violence. Their queen, Sovereign, had lived for over 800 years. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had crushed rebellions and conquered civilizations. Nothing in the galaxy frightened her. She sat on her throne made of black metal, her 4 arms resting on the armrests, her compound eyes staring at the reports in front of her. The room around her was dark and cold, the way she preferred it. Her advisors stood in silence, waiting for her to speak. The princess was coming to Nexus Prime. Had been watching the young royal for some time. Princess was foolish and idealistic. She believed in peace and cooperation. She thought that words could solve problems that had existed for centuries. It was almost amusing how naive she was. But the princess was also dangerous. She was gaining influence among the younger species of the galaxy. Her speeches about unity were inspiring other worlds to resist expansion. If she continued, she might actually convince the Galactic Concord to take action against the Dominion. Could not allow that. She turned to her chief advisor, a warrior named who had served her for 200 years. "Tell me about her guardian," she said. Stepped forward and activated a holographic display. An image of Daniel appeared in the air, rotating slowly. He looked small and fragile compared to the warriors around him. "He is a human," said. "They are a young species from a small planet called Earth, short, approximately 80 to 100 years. Limited physical strength compared to most galactic species. Their technology is primitive." Studied the image. The human had brown hair and eyes that seemed ordinary enough. His body showed the scars of old battles, but he was still just a creature of flesh and bone. "Why would they trust their princess to such a weak being?" she asked. "We are not certain, Sovereign. Our intelligence suggests he saved her life during a slaver attack 5 cycles ago. Since then, he has served as her sole guardian." Made a clicking sound with her mandibles. It was the equivalent of laughter. One human, they protect their royal bloodline with one human. She rose from her throne, her massive form casting shadows across the room. "This is an insult, either to us or to themselves." She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Her mind was already forming a plan. "Send the Crimson Talons to Nexus Prime," she said. "200 of our best warriors. I will attend the summit personally." Looked surprised. "You, Sovereign, is that wise?" Turned to face him. Her compound eyes reflected the dim light like pools of darkness. "The princess wants to talk about peace. I want to show her what peace with the really means." She smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "I want to show her how foolish she is to trust a human with her life." Far across the galaxy, Daniel Carter felt something wrong. He was standing in the observation deck of the transport ship, watching the stars pass by. Was in her quarters, preparing her speech for the summit. The crew was going about their normal duties. Everything seemed calm and quiet. But Daniel had learned to trust his instincts. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. His communicator buzzed. He pressed the button and heard a familiar voice. "Danny, it's Grace." Grace was his contact on Nexus Prime. She worked in station security and had helped him several times in the past. If she was calling, it meant trouble. "What's happening?" he asked. "They are mobilizing. 200 Crimson Talons just requested docking permission at the station, and Danny, Sovereign, is with them." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The Crimson Talons were the elite warriors of the Dominion. They were trained from birth to kill, and herself coming to the summit was unprecedented. "Why would she come personally?" he asked. "I don't know, but I don't like it. The princess should reconsider attending." Daniel thought about that for a moment. He knew would never back down. She had spent months preparing for this summit. She believed she could make a difference. Telling her to stay away would be useless. "She won't cancel," he said. "You know that." Grace was silent for a moment. "Then be careful, Danny. They are planning something. I can feel it." "So can I." He ended the call and stood alone in the darkness, thinking. 200 Crimson Talons. One of him. The math was not good. If they decided to attack, he would be dead in seconds. He could not fight an army. But he could prepare. Daniel went to his quarters and began checking his equipment. His pulse pistol was clean and fully charged. His armor was damaged from years of use, but it would still stop a few shots. He had 2 knives hidden in his boots and a small explosive device in his belt, just in case. It was not much against 200 elite warriors. He sat on his bed and thought about his options. Running was not possible. Hiding was not possible. The only thing he could do was stay close to and hope they did not do anything stupid. But hopping was not a strategy. Daniel made a decision. If they attacked, he would fight. He would die probably, but he would fight. He would buy whatever time he could. Maybe it would be enough for help to arrive. Maybe it would not. Either way, he would not let them take her. He had made a promise 5 cycles ago, lying broken on the floor of a burning ship. He had looked into her frightened eyes and silently sworn that no one would ever hurt her while he was alive. That promise still meant something. Daniel stood up and walked to the door. He needed to check on. He needed to see her face and remind himself why he was here. He found her in her quarters, sitting at her desk, surrounded by papers and holographic displays. She was practicing her speech, her silver eyes focused and determined. She looked up when he entered and smiled. "Danny, is everything okay?" He wanted to tell her he wanted to warn her about the danger coming their way, but she needed to focus on her speech. She needed to believe that everything would be fine. "Everything is fine," he said, "just checking on you." She studied his face for a moment, had learned to read him over the years. She knew when he was hiding something. "You're worried," she said. Daniel smiled. He could never fool her. "I'm always worried. It's my job." She stood up and walked to him. She was tall for almost the same height as him. Her silver skin seemed to glow in the soft light of her quarters. "Whatever happens at the summit," she said, "I know you'll protect me." "Always," he replied. She hugged him then, the way she had hugged him 1,000 times before. Daniel held her gently, careful not to show how much fear he was carrying inside. 200 crimson talons. One human. And a promise that could not be broken. Nexus Prime was the largest space station in the galaxy. It floated at the center of neutral space, a massive structure of metal and glass where species from 100 worlds came to trade and negotiate. Today, it was hosting the Galactic Concord Summit, and the main hall was filled with delegates from every corner of known space. Daniel stood at the edge of the platform, watching the crowd. He had positioned himself so he could see every entrance, every exit, every possible threat. His hand rested casually near his pulse pistol, ready to draw in less than a second. Stood at the central podium, delivering her speech. Her voice was clear and strong, filling the massive hall with words of hope and unity. She spoke about cooperation between species. She spoke about ending old conflicts and building new partnerships. She spoke about a future where the galaxy could be at peace. The delegates listened with various levels of interest. Some seemed moved by her words, others looked bored or skeptical. A few were clearly hostile, but none of them worried Daniel. He was watching the doors. The delegation had not arrived yet. 200 crimson talons were somewhere on the station, and their queen was with them. Daniel had positioned Grace and a few other friendly contacts around the hall, but they would be useless if they decided to start a fight. Then the doors opened. Sovereign entered first. She was nearly 3 meters tall, towering over every other being in the room. Her chitinous armor was black as night, polished to a shine that reflected the ceremonial lights. Her 4 arms were folded behind her back, and her compound eyes swept across the hall like a predator surveying prey. Behind her marched the Crimson Talons, row after row of elite warriors, their weapons technically peace-bonded but clearly ready for violence. They moved in perfect formation, their steps echoing through the suddenly silent hall. 200 of them. Daniel counted as they entered, 200 plus the queen herself. The other delegates backed away, creating a path for them. Fear was visible on many faces. Even the most powerful species in the galaxy knew better than to challenge the Crimson Talons. Stop speaking. She watched the queen approach with calm eyes that showed no fear. Daniel felt proud of her in that moment. She had grown so much from the frightened girl he had found in that storage room. Ascended to the platform, her massive form making the structure creak beneath her weight. Her soldiers spread out around the delegation, surrounding them completely. Daniel found himself with warriors on every side, their weapons barely an arm's length away. He did not move. He did not flinch. He kept his hand near his pistol and his eyes on the queen. Studied him for a long moment. Her compound eyes were impossible to read, but Daniel could feel her attention like a physical weight. Then she made that clicking sound again, laughter. She turned to face, dismissing Daniel as if he were nothing more than furniture. "Little princess," said. Her voice was deep and carried across the silent hall without effort. "You come to speak of peace. You stand before the greatest powers in the galaxy and talk about unity and cooperation." She gestured at the Crimson Talons surrounding them. "I have brought 200 of my finest warriors, 200 beings trained since birth in the art of killing, each one worth 100 soldiers from lesser species." Leaned closer too, her massive form looming over the princess. "And you bring one guardian, one small, fragile creature to protect royal blood." She straightened and looked around the hall, making sure everyone was watching. "Tell me, child, tell all of us gathered here, who protects you so boldly against such odds?" The question hung in the air. Every eye in the hall was on the princess. Every ear waited for her response. Daniel felt his muscles tense. This was the moment. If was going to attack, it would be now, while was exposed and vulnerable. But did not hesitate. She smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine and full of confidence. She looked at Daniel, her silver eyes meeting his brown ones, and in that moment something passed between them. 5 years of trust, 5 years of protection, 5 years of a bond that transcended species and culture. Then she turned back to and answered, "My guardian." 2 words, simple and clear, spoken without doubt or fear. The hall remained silent, stared at the princess, her compound eyes showing something that might have been confusion. "Your guardian," she repeated, "one human against 200 crimson talons." "Yes," said one human. Turned to look at Daniel again. This time she really looked. She saw the calm in his eyes, the readiness in his posture, the complete lack of fear on his face. "Does he not understand the odds?" she asked, but she kept her eyes on Daniel. "Does he not know that my soldiers could kill him before he draws his weapon?" Stepped closer to Daniel. She stood beside him, not behind him. "He understands perfectly," she said. "He simply does not care." Was silent for a moment. The entire hall was silent. 200 crimson talons watched their queen, waiting for orders. Station security watched from the edges, hands on weapons, knowing they would be too late if violence began. And in the center of it all, one human stood beside his princess, ready to die. "You are either very brave or very foolish," said to Daniel. Daniel finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the hall, everyone heard him. "I am neither, sovereign. I am simply doing my job." "Your job," repeated. She took a step toward him, her massive form blocking out the light. "Your job is to die against impossible odds. Your job is to throw your short, fragile life away for someone who is not even your species." "My job," Daniel said, meeting her eyes without flinching, "is to protect her, whatever that requires." Stared at him, the moment stretched on forever. Then she spoke again, her voice carrying a note of curiosity beneath the threat. "And if I ordered my soldiers to attack right now, if I told them to cut you down where you stand, what would you do?" Daniel did not hesitate. "I would fight." "You would lose." "Probably," he shrugged, "but I would fight anyway." The answer seemed to catch off guard. She had expected fear. She had expected negotiation, begging, some attempt to talk her out of violence. Instead, she got a simple statement of fact. He would fight. He would lose. He would fight anyway. She looked at again. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you trust him? He cannot win. He cannot even survive. What good is a guardian who will die in seconds?" Took Daniel's hand. Her silver fingers intertwined with his brown ones. "Because the seconds matter," she said. "Because he will not run. Because he will not surrender. Because even if he falls, he will fall fighting for me." She smiled again, that warm and confident smile. "That is worth more than 1,000 soldiers who might run when things get hard." The hall watched, the delegates watched, the Crimson Talons watched. And for the first time in 800 years, found herself uncertain about what to do next. The silence in the hall was heavy. Every being present felt the weight of the moment pressing down on them. History was being made, and everyone knew it. Stood frozen, her compound eyes fixed on the human and the princess. She had come to this summit to make a statement. She had wanted to show the galaxy that there were fools for trusting a human with their royal blood. She had wanted to demonstrate her power. Instead, she found herself facing something she had not expected. Faith. The princess trusted her guardian completely. It was written in her face, in her voice, in the way she held his hand. She was not afraid because she believed in him, not in his ability to win against impossible odds, but in his willingness to try. Had seen many things in her 800 years. She had seen armies march and empires fall. She had seen heroes rise and cowards run, but she had never seen anything quite like this. A creature willing to die for someone who was not his own kind. A being who looked at 200 elite warriors and felt no fear because fear was irrelevant. The outcome did not matter. The odds did not matter. The only thing that mattered was the promise. "You confuse me, human," said finally. Her voice was quieter now, thoughtful. "My intelligence reports told me your species was weak, short-lived, fragile. They said you were barely worth considering as a threat." Daniel did not react to the insult. He simply waited. "But they never told me about this," continued. "This madness you call loyalty, this willingness to die for something that gives you nothing in return." "It gives me everything," Daniel said quietly. "She gave me a purpose when I had none. She gave me a home when mine was lost. She gave me trust when no one else would." He looked at and his eyes softened. "Protecting her is not a burden, Sovereign. It is an honor." Was silent for a long moment. Around her, the Crimson Talons waited for orders. Their weapons were ready. They could end this in seconds if she commanded. But she did not command. "Tell me something, human," she said. "If my soldiers attacked right now, how many of them do you think you could take with you?" Daniel considered the question seriously. He looked around at the warriors surrounding him, calculating distances and angles with the practiced eye of a veteran soldier. 30, he said. "Maybe 40 if I'm lucky." 30 repeated, "against 200. "I never said I would win," Daniel replied. "I said I would fight. There's a difference." One of the Crimson Talons behind Daniel shifted slightly. It was a small movement, almost invisible, but Daniel caught it. His hand moved to his pistol in a blur of motion. The hall gasped, the soldier froze. Daniel had not drawn his weapon, but his hand was on it, ready. His eyes had locked onto the soldier who moved, and in those eyes was something cold and dangerous. "Tell your soldier to be still," Daniel said too. His voice was calm, but there was iron beneath it. "I would hate to start something before we finish our conversation." Made a gesture, and the soldier stepped back. "Fast," she said, studying Daniel with new interest. "Very fast for a human." "I've had practice." Walked around him slowly, examining him from different angles like a collector studying a rare specimen. "The chose well," she admitted. "Not because you are strong, not because you are powerful, but because you are dangerous in a way we did not anticipate." She stopped in front of him again. "My soldiers would kill you, human, make no mistake about that. But you are right. You would take some of them with you. And in those seconds, while my warriors were cutting you down, anything could happen." She glanced around the hall at the other delegates, at the station security, at the cameras recording everything. "If I ordered an attack now, the entire galaxy would see me kill an unarmed princess and her single guardian. They would see 200 Crimson Talons slaughter one human who refused to run." She made that clicking sound again, but this time it did not sound like laughter. "They would call me a coward. They would say the conqueror needed an army to defeat one fragile creature." "Would that bother you?" asked. Looked at her. Yes, it would. She turned away and walked to the edge of the platform. For a long moment, she stared out at the assembled delegates, thinking. "I have conquered many worlds," she said finally. "I have broken many armies, but I have always done it with honor. My enemies feared me because I was strong, not because I was cruel." She turned back to face Daniel and, "If I killed you today, I would not be strong. I would be a butcher, and butchers are not respected. They are hated." Daniel felt some of the tension leave his shoulders, but he did not relax completely. The game was not over yet. "What do you want, Sovereign?" he asked. "Why did you really come here?" Smiled. It was an unsettling expression on her alien face. "I came to test the princess, to see if the stories about her were true. They said she was brave. They said she was different from other royals. They said she had a guardian who would die for her without hesitation." She nodded slowly. The stories were true, perhaps more true than the storytellers knew. She gestured to her soldiers, and they began to relax, lowering their weapons slightly. "I will not attack today, Princess. Not because I fear your guardian, not because I fear the consequences, but because I find myself curious." "Curious about what?" asked. "About humans," replied. "About what makes them willing to die for creatures they barely understand, about why they trust them so completely." She looked at Daniel one last time. "You have earned something today, human, something I do not give easily." "What is that?" "My respect." She turned and walked back toward her soldiers. "I will listen to the princess's speech about peace. I will consider her words, and then we will see what happens next." She paused at the edge of the platform. "But know this, human. If you ever betray her trust, if you ever fail her when she needs you most, I will find you, and I will make you wish you had died today." Daniel nodded. "If I ever fail her, I'll already wish that." Stared at him for a moment. Then she made that clicking sound one more time. This time, it sounded almost like approval. The crimson talons formed up behind their queen, and together they marched to the side of the hall, taking positions among the other delegates. The immediate crisis was over. Squeezed Daniel's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he whispered back. "She's still here, still watching." "I know, but you made her listen. That's more than anyone else has ever done." She walked back to the podium to continue her speech. Daniel returned to his position at the edge of the platform, watching the crowd. The game was not over. But for now, they had won a round. 3 days passed after the confrontation in the summit hall. The negotiations continued. Delegates from 100 worlds argued and debated and slowly moved toward agreements that had seemed impossible just a week ago. Princess was at the center of it all, meeting with leaders, drafting proposals, building the framework for a new era of galactic cooperation. And always, 3 steps behind her, Daniel watched. They had been surprisingly cooperative. Attended every session, listening more than speaking, her compound eyes constantly moving between the princess and her guardian. She never threatened again. She never made aggressive moves, but she was always watching. On the final day of the summit, the treaty was ready for signing. It was not a complete peace. Centuries of conflict could not be erased with a few documents, but it was a beginning. A mutual non-aggression pact between the Dominion and the Empire, an agreement to establish diplomatic channels, a promise to try. The signing ceremony was held in the same hall where the confrontation had taken place. Delegates filled the seats, cameras recorded from every angle, and the galaxy waited to see history unfold. Signed first, her silver hand moving gracefully across the document. Then it was turn. The queen rose from her seat and walked to the signing table. She towered over everyone else in the room, her chitinous armor gleaming under the lights. She picked up the writing instrument with one of her 4 hands and paused. Then she looked at Daniel. "Before I sign," she said, her voice carrying through the hall, "I wish to say something." The room fell silent. Daniel tensed, ready for anything. "I have lived for 800 years, continued. "I have conquered 47 worlds. I have faced armies that numbered in the millions. I have never been afraid." She set the writing instrument down and walked around the table until she stood directly in front of Daniel. 3 days ago, I brought 200 of my finest warriors to this station. I intended to humiliate the princess. I intended to show the galaxy that trusting a human was foolish. She paused, her compound eyes fixed on Daniel's face. "Instead, I learned something. Something my intelligence reports never told me. Something I should have known before I came here." "What did you learn?" Daniel asked quietly. "I learned why they keep you close," said. "Not because you are strong, not because you are fast, not because you can defeat armies with your bare hands." She turned to address the entire hall. "Humans are not protection," she said. "They are a declaration, a warning. When you see a human standing beside someone, it means that person is loved. And when humans love something, they become the wall that darkness breaks against. She looked at Daniel again. You would have died for her, without hesitation, without regret. And in dying, you would have made me the villain of every story told for the next 1,000 years. Daniel did not deny it. There was nothing to deny. That is why I am signing this treaty, continued. Not because I fear their armies or their technology. I am signing because I respect what they have found in humanity. She walked back to the table and picked up the writing instrument. I am signing because I have seen what happens when a human chooses to love, and I am wise enough to know that some enemies are not worth making. She signed the treaty with a flourish. The hall erupted in applause. Delegates stood and cheered. Centuries of Cold War had ended with a few strokes of a pen. But was not finished. She walked back to where Daniel stood and extended one of her 4 arms. I would shake your hand, human, the way your people do when they make agreements. Daniel looked at her arm for a moment, then he reached out and took it. Her grip was powerful but controlled. She could have crushed his bones with a thought. Instead, she held him gently, almost respectfully. If you ever grow tired of serving she said, the Dominion would be honored to have you. I could use someone who does not know how to quit. Daniel smiled slightly. Thank you, Sovereign, but my place is here. Nodded as if she had expected that answer. I know, that is what makes you valuable. She released his hand and turned to. Your guardian is not protection, Princess, she said. He is a message, a statement to everyone who would threaten you. What message? Asked. Smiled that unsettling alien smile. The message is simple. Hurt this one, and you will face something worse than armies. You will face a human who has nothing left to lose. She turned and walked away, her soldiers falling into formation behind her. The summit was over. Later that night, Daniel stood alone on the observation deck of their ship. The stars stretched out before them, millions of points of light in the endless darkness. We did it, said softly. We actually did it. You did it, Daniel corrected. I just stood there looking threatening. Laughed. It was a beautiful sound, like silver bells in the wind. You did more than that, Danny. You showed her what humanity means. You showed the entire galaxy. Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching the stars. I just did what I promised, he said finally. 5 years ago on that burning ship I made a decision. I decided that your life was worth more than mine. That hasn't changed. Turned to face him. Her silver eyes were bright with tears. You are not just my guardian, Daniel. You know that, right? You are my family, the only family that matters. Daniel felt his own eyes grow wet. He blinked it away. I know, he said, and you are mine. They stood together in silence, watching the stars pass by. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, new threats to face. But tonight they were safe. And somewhere across the galaxy, in the throne room of the Dominion, Sovereign sat alone in the darkness, thinking about a human who had refused to run. She thought about all the worlds she had conquered, all the enemies she had crushed, all the power she had accumulated over 800 years. And she realized something. The most dangerous creatures in the galaxy were not the ones with the biggest armies or the most powerful weapons. They were the ones who loved so completely that death meant nothing to them. Humans were short-lived, fragile, primitive in many ways. But they loved fiercely. And that made them the most dangerous species in the universe. Looked out at the stars and made a silent promise to herself. She would never threaten what humans chose to protect. Because now she understood. When a human decides to guard something, that something becomes untouchable. Not because the human cannot be killed, but because killing them only makes the story last forever. And stories were more powerful than any weapon ever built. The end.